So, when this came to me as a topic, you want to build a 21st century battleship, honestly, my first thought was, okay, that could be a fun one. We'll see if anyone actually wants it, because as a thought experiment, it could be interesting. As a thought experiment. Especially seeing as I'm a naval historian, not an engineer, not a futurist, not anything of those. I have taught history of engineering to engineering students. That does not make me an engineer. I come from a family of naval architects and engineers, so I have an understanding. I am not an engineer. I know where the line is. I'm a historian. But I started to think this through, and I thought, well, if we consider since World War II, we've had a bit of a weird period. We had the Cold War, where mostly there was an overwhelming maritime power on one side, and the other side took alternative means to try and dislodge it. So rather than necessarily confronting it on an equal footing, they were looking at capabilities which would undermine its ability to interact, which would be, sort of. Honestly, the Soviet Union, you could argue, were looking at the naval equivalent of guerrilla warfare. Which makes sense. It fits the situation they're in. Okay. Alright. So we haven't had peer on peer, truly peer on peer naval forces confrontation. No, sort of. It's always been to extent an asymmetric strategy on one side versus the other side. Okay. All right. And battleships, they tend to come about when we have a symmetrical scenario where we have peers fighting peers. That's when you start to have battleships appear. I.e., major warships built around conflict, built around inflicting maximum damage on their opponents. Okay. Alright. So once we start with that scenario, and you move forward from that scenario, you then get to the question of, well, since the Cold War, what we've had a very interesting monopolar world for a while. That was what it was theorized as being, and it was theorized it was going to be the end of history and always be a monopolar world. Oh my, how that has changed. So now we have a lot of challenges for the sea. A lot of challenges of peer on peer. Some of them at the highest levels, some of them at the not so highest levels. Okay. It's amazing. This video, this topic has gone in a couple of months from being completely thought priest to being actually, context. I could be seeing these in a few years' time. Now, to be fair, I have to admit I have had some fun with this. I have had some fun, so please note that. And I will say again, for those who aren't really interested in wanting to build a 21st century battleship, I'm going to be doing a discussing of what battleships do, what they did in peace and war, etc., and what they might do in peace and war, and the whole viability of it prior to the Shameless book plug. And then after the Shameless book plug, we'll get into some of the options for a future design. So, maybe you stay for the first half if you're not interested in the second half. So you want to build a battleship. Now, honestly, the traditional response to that is, but it was gazumped by the missile age, realistically. aircraft carriers were annoying and had certainly caused problems, but the battleship had forged such a good partnership with the aircraft carrier. If it was only aircraft and aircraft carriers, then you probably would still see a couple of battleships in service. They'd still be backing each other up to an extent. With the battleship now serving as sort of principal escort and almost ambassador / herald of the carrier battle group, which it would be a core part of. But that didn't happen. The world didn't persist like that, and missiles came in, and the very quick answer was, well, no one else has them, and it's far easier to build a missile to bash through armor. That's actually a bit stupid when we think about it, because it was quite easy to build shells to bash through armor. It's nothing new to have something that can bash through armor. That's the point. You have the armor to buy you time, not because it's impenetrable. There are various armor schemes you could adopt, and of course you could come up with something which would, how do I put this, trigger a missile early enough that it wouldn't get to anything dangerous. We'll talk about this later. But you want to build a battleship. That's going to be a big commitment. Okay, it's not going to be cheap. It really isn't. During researching this, the amount of articles I came across of people going, it would be cheaper to build battleships than aircraft carriers. Really? A modern battleship? Okay, you don't have to festoon possibly the air group, but it ain't gonna be cheap. It ain't gonna be cheap under any circumstance. In fact, there is nothing cheap in modern warfare at the moment. The reason why? Because we don't build enough for it to be cheap. I'm sorry, but the reason why, in terms of build quality, Volvo produced very good build quality of a similar level, I would say, in terms of build quality to Ferrari, but cost a lot less, is because of the volume of production they put into it. Notice the car makers I used here. Volvo and Ferrari. Okay? Alright? I was tempted to use Aston Martin. I was tempted to use other things, but I wanted to go for things which were both considered, to an extent, luxury brands, because Volvo is considered a bit of a luxury brand. The quality, they're great. I would have liked to put in Subaru there, but as much as I personally love Subarus, I know there are people out there who don't like Subarus as much as I do. So, you know, mostly people who drive Mitsubishis. For some reason, you know, live your life choices. You chose the second best, it's on you. Considering I'm currently driving a Volvo, I can't really claim to be a Scooby owner. I have been in the past. I've had two of them. They were beautiful cars, and I love them both. Oh, they were good cars. But the thing is, if you're not building enough volume of ships, if you're not building enough volume of weapon systems, it's never going to get cheap. Because the development costs are going to be spread across fewer and fewer units. And development costs always get more expensive because you want something that's better, faster, spicier. You want it to be better. You want this thing to be this great thing. And that tends to require money to get it. And the thing is, as I give an example, the Type 45s regularly, that, you know, they're called billion-pound destroyers. Well, actually, they don't cost £1 billion. They cost a lot less, roughly £450 million to build. But it's the development costs, and development costs were structured originally for 12 ships. Which, by the way, considering the remaining 6 would have probably cost roughly £200 million a unit to build, if not less, you'd have probably, instead of paying $6 billion to get 6, you'd have paid $7.2 billion to get 12. See the problem here? In terms of costs? You build more of something, the cheaper it gets. Because you've already done the research. Now, there's a certain point at which you go, well, hang on, that's no longer useful, I need to research something new. But again, numbers, quantity equals a certain level of quality. It's one of the reasons why when I sit currently looking at all the discussions about new programs countries should get into with the money they're spending, I go, no, 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 no. Buy more of what you're already getting. Buy more of what you're already getting. Don't go going for new programs. It'll be incredibly expensive to start up. You'll waste all your money. Actually, just buy more of what you're already buying. Britain, buy more Type 26s. Buy more Type 31s or 32s, whichever variant you're going to call them of the same class. It doesn't matter. Buy more of what you're already building. That's going to deliver the best value for money. You don't need to stand up any extra training. You don't need any more research and development. It's ready. It's there. It's off the shelf. Buy it! No politician will listen to me. They'll all go chasing the sexy. They'll all go chasing the new. They'll all go pouring money into research and development for the next quantum torpedo system that will also, while not only destroying all the enemies, will also spend the entire time teaching your kid how to do their geography homework and juggling the cooking, the cleaning, and the washing up, as well as actually juggling. Who wants the thing that already exists when you can have the fantasy of tomorrow? But the thing about today's topic, and that the important thing is, you want to build a battleship. Well, I've given you several arguments against it, but you still want to build a battleship. Let's go for it. The traditional mission profile, peace. Yeah, battleships did stuff in peacetime. They didn't just sit around waiting for the next war. They did fire their guns quite regularly to practice their gunnery drill. I know there's been discussions about that recently. There were big problems with the Royal Navy in the Victorian era, but 1920s and 30s, they did quite a lot of the gunnery drill. Don't take this the wrong way, not only had the lesson of the post-Victorian era, but the experience of the battlecruiser fleet had meant that pretty much every officer was obsessed with firing their guns. But they were assisted in two things. One, the explosives being used were cleaner, so that made it less dirty for the ships. And two, they actually got better at cleaning the ships. That sounds strange, but one of the things you have to do is actually design a ship to be cleaned. You have to design a ship so you can clean it. I know, it's obscene. But think about it from this perspective. I am getting for my office, eventually I want to get one of those little Roombas to wander around and do some hoovering, because I have a corgi as well as a poodle. And it doesn't matter if I hoover the house 3 times a week. I am never going to keep on top of the corgi fluff and how it multiplies. I just am not. I will not. It's a losing battle. It is a war I have lost. I have been vanquished. All I can do is manage it, okay? And so if I keep hoovering 3 times a week, and I also add a Roomba, my theory is I can manage it that much better. But at the moment, all my bookshelves are balancing on the floor themselves. For a Roomba to be effective, I'm going to have to lift them up on their legs. Which has been the plan from the beginning. But why does that make it effective? So the Roomba can get in underneath them. And so it's easier for it to access around the place and find all the things it needs to go. It also raises the books up. They'll be on metal legs. It raises the books up, which means I have to bend down less to pick them up and get them out. Which, whilst is not a problem now, if in my older years I find it less comfortable to do bending over, I will not have as far to go. It's worthwhile thinking about these things now. I recently completed another orbit of the Sun. I have to think about these things. So yeah, you have to design your ships to be clean. You also have to design your ships to maximize their presence. That means they need to be able to get in harbours, they need to be big, they need to have space to entertain, and did I mention they need to be big? Battleships were great at this. It was a national status symbol how many of you had them you had, because they're so big, so powerful, they are a national status symbol. Kind of like nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers are today. Well, trust me, if someone was operating battleships, they'd still be up there, because there's a cachet of a battleship that a destroyer or a cruiser just never has. Cruisers and destroyers are multi-purpose tools. Everyone knows it. But a battleship, the clue's in its name. It's built for war. You are able to afford to have a ship which is built purely for war. Nothing more, nothing less. That is status as a nation. It is. And over and above all that, they can be a flagship. They can be a status asset in that regard, which is useful for hosting dignitaries and having meetings and all the important things you can do with a flagship. But that all brings them into their conflict management asset role. Now, in terms of conflict management, they are a very big asset, and they were traditionally a very, very big asset. Now, today we think of conflict management, we think of the biggest asset that can show up is an aircraft carrier. But that's a bit of a lie. It's an aircraft carrier battle group. It's a carrier battle group. The thing is, in the period we're talking about, especially immediately to prior to World War II, your options were more flexible. You had a greater graduation of ships and differential to be able to turn up to signal your displeasure. Up to including a solo battleship, because unlike a carrier, which is, as I always try and point out to people when they try and critique it, I go, a carrier is the sum of all the parts of its group. A carrier exists to support and provide organic aviation strength to a fleet. This can be used as both of its longest reach and as its greatest shield. But it is part of an overall force and a task group that will be projecting that power and will be fighting it. You do not fight a carrier solo, you fight its task group. It's one of the reasons why I find it funny when people go things like, will the carrier be safe going through the Straits of Hormuz? Well, if it's got a Type 45 and a Type 23 with it, i.e. a destroyer and a frigate, I'm fairly certain they should have enough firepower to deal with anything the Houthis are going to offer. If they don't, then there are severe questions that need to be asked about the British defence procurement. Even more than they already need to be ones asked. And please note, I'm one who asks them on a regular basis, so if I'm saying it should be okay, it probably will be. Added that F-35s and the other things operating off the carriers, airborne early warning, yeah, I don't perceive there being much of a problem, really. But it's amazing how often the things go down to, will the phalanx be enough? It's not enough. Missiles should have been fitted to the carrier. And it's okay. No, because a carrier operates as part of a battle group. A battleship would go solo. So you had a sort of option of a whole level of single ships which could turn up. You could send a destroyer or a sloop to go do a first visit. Then you might send a cruiser. Then a larger cruiser, or maybe a group of cruisers, the local squadron, usually the local squadron commander. And then, maybe, if you really don't want to jump to conflict just then, you want to try and give them one last chance, a solo capital ship, a battleship, will turn up and go, hello. So, it appears you haven't listened to everyone. Now, the thing is, you really don't want me turning up with my friends. Because the moment a squadron of us turn up, we're a very expensive outlay to send. We're an incredibly expensive outlay to send. And as such, we will not come for anything short of war. So the moment you have us all here, the moment you have us all turning up, all coming to attack you, it's going to be war, and you're going to be dealing with a lot of firepower. A lot of firepower. And maybe you want to rethink that, because can you see how big my guns are? Can you see how well turned out my crew is? Can you see how many Marines I have aboard? And a band! And all the pieces of technology I have aboard, all the advanced tech, all the smiling, happy crew, the personable crew, so erudite, so educated, so capable at their jobs and tasks. Are you sure you want to do this? The battleship was useful. It was very useful in that role. It was an asset. But, of course, modern navies, we don't have the same graduation of force structure. We don't have the same numbers of forces available to do the graduation of force structure. And that makes signaling less nuanced and also more complicated at the same time, because you're not able to really signal your level of interest by what type of ship you're sending. You're either able to send a ship or not able to send a ship, and that doesn't always give the right emphasis, because if all you send is a frigate, they go, well, you just sent a baby ship, you're obviously not interested. Actually, that's all we had available. We'd have sent something bigger if we had something available, but we don't have anything bigger available. Now, their traditional profile in war is rather easy to say. The destruction of the enemy. They are a principal war-fighting asset. But what does that really mean? Well, they are meant to engage their counterparts and hopefully come out successful. They were meant to dispute and preferably gain control of the sea, which allowed you to carry out operations upon the sea. And again, flagship. They were command facilities. They had staff facilities. They were capable of taking all those personnel that you needed to run a fleet and have them cohabit in a sustainable fashion, and hopefully from there be able to promulgate a series of sensible commands by which to how to put this, to coordinate the operations of your forces. I'm not sure why I suddenly have a poodle in my lap, but apparently that's what he wanted. What can I say? He heard me talking about flagships and the status assets, and he decided that I should really have my biggest status asset in my lap. Is that right? Yes. A poodle. Not useful for anything other than hugs and love, are you? Nope. Anyway. With that being said, and you're really trying to get patted. Let's consider, after we go through the traditional warfighting profile, which is kind of easy to talk about and easily understood, to consider what would be the modern mission profile. Well, I put together a sort of interesting thought process here, because I started thinking, well, they'd still be doing the presence mission. In fact, they'd be jolly useful for the presence mission, because currently we're really short of an asset that can signal full displeasure without sending an entire carrier battle group. So, honestly, on that grounds, they start to look cheap. This is the point at which they start to look cheap. I have to, for warfighting terms, okay, deploy verbal. Terrible. I have to deploy a full carrier battle group when I need to, fight a war. But if I'm trying to make a point diplomatically, and I'm trying to make a point about presence, I don't want to. If I can avoid it, it's expensive. And I don't have that many of them. So I started thinking about, well, the Peter Velicki and the Kirov class and all the stuff they get up to, and going, well, hang on, that's, to an extent, what the Russians use them for. They are almost a self-deploying... There is nothing short of a carrier battle group, which you will be absolutely certain will destroy this. Carrier battle group or an SSN. But the trouble is, conflict deterrence and presence is about what you can see. And whilst in recent years there have been a spate of people going, I've got a grand idea, let's surface a submarine here and make a point. That's not really something I'd advise. In fact, I would absolutely and completely discourage that as an idea. Submarines are stealth ambush predators. They're extremely good as long as they maintain their stealth. Rather like you don't want to be the panther or tiger, or anything that relies on stealth and ambush predating, that walks around in the open on the beach with no cover. You don't want to be the submarine that surfaces. You kind of give away your position. This is one of the reasons why navies are quite so paranoid about the entrance to their submarine bases. Places where the submarines have to surface to come in or go out. Places where they might be tracked, where data might be gathered, where you can be guaranteed who is who and where they are, so you can try to get a noise profile of them. Yeah, that's a problem. But a large surface asset, that's already on the surface. Doesn't lose anything by being visible. In fact, you can argue in a presence mission, as said, it gains it by being highly visible. By being very, very visible. Again, it's a national status symbol. We actually have battleships. Yes, there are going to be people laughing about it. People go, "Oh, you've gone back to the past. That's so out of date." Yes, what you need are lots of small ships with missiles. They'll kill it. So they go, well, yeah, they might do. But that would be if they were fighting a battleship from World War II. But this would be a modern battleship with modern systems on. That could be an issue. Suddenly you're thinking, well, we got missiles. Well, yes, so we got surface-to-air missiles to defend ourselves, and close-in weapon systems, and various levels of cannon and secondary guns. We are very well armed and armoured as well. We are a survivable asset. It's going to take a lot to take us out. At which point, someone will probably start muttering something about hypersonics! Hypersonics have been around for a lot longer than people seem to think they have. Especially if you go by the definition which is currently seems to be being used, which is anything which goes a little bit fast for part of its journey. They achieve hypersonic speed for how long? About 2 minutes in the middle of their trip. Okay. They're a hypersonic. No, they're not. They're a curveball with attitude. They're not a hypersonic. But that's me being rude. Accurate, but rude. So, yeah. Then we go on to a flagship. Well, again, they could be useful for it, especially for certain nations who don't have carriers. Standing up a carrier, putting all the infrastructure to supporting the air group, all the training, everything, that's difficult. A modern battleship would be, well, if you're operating already destroyers and frigates, it's a scaled up warship, surface combatant. Okay, it's going to be a lot bigger, but getting the people for it is not going to exactly be a difficult task. Yes, you're going to have to recruit more crew, but you're growing your navy anyway. And honestly, there is an advantage with a larger ship because it can be used as a training ship. Because a ship, doesn't matter what size it is, only needs one chief engineer. Only needs one captain. One executive officer. Your senior officers and senior NCOs, yes, they're going to be some of your most experienced and best personnel. But you don't need any more of them for this ship, for a battleship, than you do a large destroyer anyway. Not a modern ship. Let me get into conflict management asset. Again, it's a battleship turning up. It's going to be a guaranteed newspaper day. And there is at least, if you have judged it right and you have got guns big enough, because let's be honest, there's no point in calling a battleship if it's not got guns big enough, there is going to be at least one picture of a pretty news lady. It will always be a pretty news lady. It will never be it might be a bloke, but if the bloke's doing it, he'll be sticking his head in the breech end and he'll be trying to gurn for a picture. Don't ask, before you start considering anything about saying this is sexist or anything like that. No, look at news. Look at the way the news goes, and in nicest way, they haven't broken out of the stereotypes in years. It's not me saying this is the news. If the news broke the stereotypes, I'd be ecstatic, but they don't. And the pretty news lady will poke her head in the barrel. The bloke will poke his head in the breech. Either way, to show how big it is. That's what they'll do. It'll be a picture of them sticking their head inside. It's always the same. Guy's head will be gelled so much it won't even lose its form after you stuck it down or not. It will literally, the hair will still be passing in place, and there'll be just enough wind fluttering around that the hair, the news lady's hair will flutter a bit, sort of, as she's sticking her head into the barrel. And that will go all around the country. Everybody think about how big guns they have, because they can stick your whole head inside them. If they have a particularly small reporter on their team, or if someone of, I don't know, Richard Hammond scale, they might stick him inside the barrel. Just for the, to show how big it is. After having, of course, had them stand next to a shell for, showing scale. And this will go round the country. And it'll not just go around that country. These days, it'll go around all the social media. It'll be everywhere. It'll be non-stop. So, it will show off its capabilities. And it will be something which you can reinforce allies by coming to visit. You can suggest to people who are not your allies that they need to reconsider events and their course of action by its visit. And the thing is, it can deploy solo. It can deploy solo. And that's an advantage. That is an advantage. Modern profile of war. Well, actually, I very quickly came up with an idea, because I keep talking about uncrewed assets recently, and the need for a command ship. And the thing is, if you want a large uncrewed task force or task group operating around a carrier, you need to have space for a number of personnel. You need to have the capability of space for maintenance of some of the assets. And you need to have, honestly, some sort of protection for the people doing the controls. Some way to try and give them some measure of safety, because they're going to be a principal target. You either have to distribute the controls around all your crewed ships in a force, which you probably will do anyway, but you also want somewhere you can command and control them from. And that is looking increasingly like they're going to chuck that into the carrier. We look at some of the discussions they've had about the 4 class and the Queen Elizabeth class with flexible command spaces. They're chucking it into the carrier. Now that makes sense. It keeps all your command and control together, but it also makes your carrier an even bigger target. It does. But there again, for coordination of the uncrewed aviation assets, it makes sense to harmonise with the carrier. But what about for subsurface and surface assets? Well, the thing is, if you had something else to command and control those, it could be a very interesting scenario. It would also mean that the battleship turning up would be a task force turning up. It would be a task group turning up, because it would be, hello, here I am. Have you seen all my friends? Yes, I'm the crewed ship in the center with the really big guns and lots of missiles. And personnel. Those around me? They're my friends. My buddies. My entourage. They might be uncrewed, but I look after them. And in return, they'll take care of you for me. Suddenly starts to become an interesting profile, because again, especially if you've not got that many crewed ships and navy, making them as big as powerful as possible adds to their impact when they turn up. There are advantages to this. I've just done a video not too long ago about the Japanese 6-6 plan, and that was literally that. Big ships, big guns. It's a great doctrine for a smaller power wanting to impress others, otherwise known as Taikan Kohyo Shugi. Taikan Kyoho Shugi. It's a really cool idea. There are nations around the world who might be interested in this, which led to, is this viable? Now, at this point, I wanted to sit here, and I was thinking I was going to be sitting here quite easily saying a very straightforward no. But the more I started thinking this through, and the more I started thinking about it, the more that sort of started to change in my mind to, actually, there are two cases. There are two cases, and that's weird to say, that there are two cases, but there are. First is, well, nations seeking something other than aircraft carrier to be their principal capital asset for peacetime presence missions and wartime task force command. There are nations out there who, for whatever reason, tradition, size, situation, don't think a carrier suits them. For example, let me put out one there. Poland. If you want a Baltic-centric force, even if you want capabilities for the North Atlantic, but if you want a Baltic-centric force, then an aircraft carrier is probably not a sensible asset. The Baltic is not a good space for aircraft carriers. It's too narrow. The Mediterranean is interesting, but it has a lot of length to it, which assists it. But the Baltic is too narrow. And so, yeah, something large, surface escort-like, starts to be surface combatant. Looks very, very attractive. And nations which really need to grow their combat capabilities but don't have the personnel to crew lots of ships. Again, we're talking about a large asset here, but it's not necessarily going to require a large number of crew. But it's going to bring a lot of firepower to the table. So things become interesting when you start to think about that. There are viabilities out there. There are options out there. And I have to stress that in the Cold War environment, they didn't make sense. In the asymmetric world of the asymmetric bipolar world of naval conflict in the Cold War, they did not make sense. But the scenario we're starting to talk about, the scenario we're starting to look at, that changes things. that changes some of the dynamics and makes this worthwhile at least thinking about. I realise there are probably a lot of people saying, no, 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 1,000 times no, and honestly, I would have been amongst you before I started researching for this video, but the more I started thinking about it, the more I started looking, the more I started going, maybe this is not that bad. Which leads us to the Shameless book plug. So, Shameless book plug. Oh, good lord. What's this going to be? Well, I said thank you to everyone who supports the channel. As always, this is the part where I go, thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing. Thank you for doing all those things which help the channel grow. This year's target is 20,000 subscribers by Christmas. I don't know. I have no idea. And book coming out soon. A new book coming out soon. I'm going to say new book coming out soon. It is going to be coming out soon. I'm working very hard to make sure it comes out soon. I want to get things right, though, because it's going to be the second book, but it's also going to be the first one, which I've entirely self-published and done myself. So please bear with me. There will be undoubtedly be a level of paranoia and focus that will take place in this time, and I do apologize for that. Please bear with me with that. I'm sorry. Okay? If things are delayed because of it, then just I apologize. And thank you to everyone who's bought Travels, Battles, and Airings and who's continuing to buy it, because it really does help. It's basically what academics are graded on, how all their books do, and the more of you that keep buying it, the better it helps it, and more people hopefully enjoy it and see its good reviews on Amazon and hopefully actually like it. Thank you. So with that being said, there are some interesting things to consider when we get into the actual battleship design. One of the things is nuclear or gas. Now, my view is, by its definition, a battleship is designed to go into fighting where it's going to get hit. So whilst I understand that Peter Velicky and the others of the Kirov class are nuclear-powered, and I understand the reasons, logistically, for it to be nuclear-powered, personally, I would prefer a gas turbine system similar to what we see on the Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers. Please note, I say similar to. I would actually divide it into four. So, four power systems, because Queen Elizabeths are divided into two. And this makes sense for them. It did make sense for their design. They've got, the twin island arrangement, but also they have the twin power system arrangement. They have got two gas turbines, 4 diesel generators. Every single one is separated up. They can run everything through 4 11 kilovolt switchboard sections. They've got 4 20 megawatt, multi-phase advanced induction motors for to provide power to the propeller shafts. So each one has two motors on it. And they have 4 20 megawatt multi-phase converters and some transformers, and the whole thing is designed to be split into 2 complete systems. So you can disable components from anything and they can be patched together, or one whole system can run and the other system can run. And the kind of modularity would have been extremely useful in the actual battleship era. If you could go back in time with this kind of system, this kind of idea, to battleship builders in the 1910s, and shown them it and gone, well, with electric propulsion, this is what we can do. We can divide it up so you can have the power generated from this and this, all spread around the ship, and you don't have to have them necessarily connected. They don't have to be down low in the ship. They can be boxed in nicely and protected so that they're protected from underwater explosions and all sorts of things, and they can be firmly in the center of the ship, and they don't have to be lined with any shafts, and we can have this, we can split it all up. They would have been absolutely ecstatic. There's a reason why the Americans were interested in the systems they were to power the Lexington-class battlecruisers, and eventually their conversions into carriers. There is a reason why these systems were attractive. In terms of survivability, if you can create a system like this which has multiple layers of survivability into it, in that not only can you, as long as one system survives, you are completely fine, but as long as enough components to create one system for to function survive, it's good. Now, the thing is, for a capital ship like a battleship, which is supposed to go closer to the enemy, is supposed to be going in, and will not be like a carrier operating necessarily inside of a massive task group, but might be operating solo. I think you'll want slightly more survivability. I'd reckon at least 3, if not, as said, 4. Which is interesting. Because to power a carrier here, you have 4 diesel generators and 2 gas turbines. So for what would you have for the for the battleship? Well, my theory would be you would try for 4 gas turbines and 4 diesel generators, and they would be the big generators. The Queen class have 2 large generators and 2 small generators. And basically, the scenario is that either one of those options could give you a lot of power. Could give you enough power to provide your systems. I'd also reckon you would need more than 2 shafts. I would not want to be dependent upon 2 shafts. I know we've gone with 2 shaft arrangement for the Queen Elizabeth. I know a 2 shaft arrangement is becoming more and more common, and certain propellers, and there's all sorts of arguments about noise and about vibration, about cost and risk and all these things, and I listen to them all. I really do. It's like the discussion about the number of how many blades you should have on a propeller and how that affects the operation and efficiency of the propeller. And it does. It has an impact. Theoretically, more blades give you more efficiency, more power, but they also, in terms of pushing water through, but there's also the fact that the closer the blades are together, the more they can start to interfere with each other, and the more they can create problems for the actual engines turning the shafts, because adding them on is the effect of lowering the gears. You get more power, but yeah. So all these things need to be considered. This is why a certain number of blades become sort of standard and de rigueur. You look at some of the propellers, but also it's one of the reasons why propellers and their shaping and their shaft design become such important national secrets, because it tells people a lot about your ship's performance and capabilities, the propellers you're using. So I would probably want to move away from those systems. I'd want to have the power supply you can see here, but instead of having shafts, I would go with podded propulsion. I would have propulsion pods, podded systems, thrust propulsion pods specifically, like they use on the large some of the large liners, etc. And I would use them to provide me with my maneuverability, but also to provide for my speed. They are in many ways going to take the place of the conventional rudders. And again, because of the way they can be placed in the hull, and where they can be placed in the hull, whilst yes, they will be placed towards the sternwards, they can be completely independent. And I could have auxiliary ones further along the hull, which are going to be less efficient, but they're going to help me with maneuvering at slow speeds and in confined waters, kind of like a bow thruster. And they're going to have an effect on, well, again, it's always in relation to your pivot point of when you're of whether you're going forwards and backwards, and whether it's 1/3 from if you're going forwards, your pivot point is about, let's put it this way, your pivot point and your moves on your hull, depending on whether you're going forwards or backwards. It's always fun, but the thing is, if you can have the right balance of pods, you could have both speed, efficiency, and maneuverability. In fact, no, not both, all of them. And I think that's a good option. a good option for what we're talking about, which is going to be a very high status asset. So I would go with a diesel generator and gas turbine setup, and I would go with pods. Now, you can make the case for a nuclear reactor. You can still make the case for a nuclear reactor and the steam system which goes with it. And with the with the modular reactors, the small reactor systems that are coming in, they do become very attractive. And maybe the solution to the problem is you have two of those reactors and you have two gas turbines, each twinned with two diesel generators, as your set of 4 power systems. I just don't like even having a small modular reactor as my as a source on a ship which is designed to potentially take damage. But there again, you could stick them in a thick armored box inside the ship. And that's the thing. You could stick them in a thick armored box inside the ship. Not necessarily on the center line, because there are a number of missile systems which are designed to try and hit the center line of the ship, but maybe off center. Again, this is going to be more advanced naval architecture and load balancing in the hull, but there are options out there. There are options. And I think you are going to have to face the fact that it's going to have to be a very, very automated system. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you could end up with both a bridge like this, eventually, on such a ship, where it's quite literally probably the helmsman is sitting at the front in this position, and you have the officer of the watch and captain's chairs slightly behind them, sitting above. You might have a tactical officer up there as well, watching a tactical display, and that's sort of giving you your situational awareness on the bridge. But I would not be surprised if you found a virtual one down in the command center, where they could do everything from there, but they'd have cameras to facilitate the looking around. Because my view is very much any battleship we're talking about, if it has armor, it's going to have sort of an armored cocoon space down below. And that's going to be where the crew can withdraw to run the battle from in safety. Well, as close to safety, as proximate to safety as they can possibly get. Now, one of the things you should notice, and I should have said this in the first slide, is that a lot of these slides, this one comes from General Electric, G Vernova, and this one, these are coming from Rolls-Royce's M2U solutions. All these things, they are coming from the companies which are doing them. And I have, where in doubt, I have chosen companies which have done very good systems, which I have some familiarity with, but which I haven't done direct work with on these projects. So I am not, therefore, acting as a salesman for anything. I wanted to avoid, I mentioned that. I wanted to avoid looking like it could be. But these are the sort of systems which are coming in. These are good examples of those systems. Ship's automation means that you can now increasingly control your engine system from your CIC. You don't necessarily need to be in the engine room. You can have someone on watch in the information center, watching all the systems on the displays. And yes, you might well have other displays within the engine room facilities for the engineers to use when they're wandering up and down systems and checking them and doing maintenance, but you can run it so that your engines, and power systems are being watched from the same space you're commanding the ship. So all the information comes into the same space. But the thing is, the more you add into that space, the more you have to have a secondary space which can offer that facilities. I would argue you need a tertiary. I would argue you should set up the bridge with those same facilities. You should set up the CIC, and you should set up some sort of damage control facility / emergency command facility, which also has the exact same facilities. And you should set them. The command center and damage control facilities should be below armor, bridge above. And basically there for how you deal with situations. You can get people there and you can run things from those positions. You can run everything from any one of those positions. That would be my idea of how to make it work, but also to shrink the crew numbers. To shrink the crew numbers as much as possible, because again, it's about survivability, but it's also about safety. It is about safety. It's one of those things of, when we're looking at these systems, you always have to remember that subdivision is as much a part of a battleship's safety and security as armor. And about building redundancy in the system. This is where size helps. Okay, when we're talking about small vessels versus larger vessels, the big advantage large vessels have over small vessels is usually redundancy you can build into the system. You can build in multiple layers of systems. You can build in multiple things which can have overlapping capabilities. You can build in the ability to actually regenerate your capabilities aboard from other subsystems which are available. Whereas a smaller ship will have less space and so can't have necessarily all these systems in there. Which leads us to damage control. Now this is where things start to get really fun in automated systems, because, well, we've already got fogging systems coming in, we've got some automated foaming systems, but really all the future stuff is designed around trying to reduce the human element in dealing with damage control, especially fire suppression, because humans can make mistakes under pressure, whereas if you're a human standing away from a scenario at risk, and you've got a nice sort of display, you've got the situation, you can have all this detail in front of you, maybe cameras giving you all the information, and temperature sensors, and all these things telling exactly what the fire is, category of the fire is, you can press the right response, and boom, it's done. And this is being done largely thanks to SCADA. Now, SCADA is Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. Yes, it's a title, it's an acronym designed to put people to sleep, but it's actually really interesting. When you start working through a lot of developments, a lot of the evolutions we're seeing in ship design, and these are some slides from BAE, 2023, I think, from their, yeah, there it is, I've got it up on that, Naval Damage Control Conference. They had a lot of interesting ideas put forward there. It was Navy Leaders Naval Damage Control Conference. It was an interesting conference by all accounts. The trouble is, once you start going into it, once you start looking at the details and the information, you start to realize two things. Number one, humans are still very much part of the firefighting process and will be until we manage to get humanoid droids working on ships as firefighters, because all the systems have been designed around the accessibility of humans. All the systems are designed around the accessibility of humans. And that's so baked into design that you would have to completely redesign the entire concept of watertight structural integrity on ships in order to change that. Think about the watertight doors. Think about how many locks there are on the doors. Think about how they're shaped. The lip, everything. Yeah. So whilst you will have some automated systems, you will have some fogging systems, some foaming systems, which will automatically put fire suppressors in there, and will do a good job. If you need to fight a more mobile fire, if you need to implement more interesting damage control, i.e. modern pumps, you need to actually start repairing things, etc., you are going to need human involvement. The thing is making the system sensible for you. Making the system work for you. That's the problem. That's what they're working to achieve. And SCADA, the data, supervisory control and data acquisition, that's critical to not just operation of the current systems, but improving the current systems and planning the future systems. Now, this is interesting because when we start talking about automation, I thought I was immediately going to do the magazine organization and handling system on the Queen Elizabeth class. That's what I thought I was going to bring up. And honestly, it'd be a good idea to have something like that, especially if you could have it integrated into a ship and it could load, or rather reload VLS tubes, similar using that sort of system. That'd be an interesting idea. Build another advantage of building something battleship scale, which we're talking, by the way, is 40,000 tons, is you could probably build into it a system whereby it could offload VLS or spent VLS tubes. Maybe it chucks them into the water. Maybe it stores them somewhere on board, or puts them back in the magazine. Maybe its magazine is specifically designed to, let's say, hold 12 new VLS slots, hold 18 VLS slots, but actually is only ever loaded with 15. So it's got free spaces that you can, or maybe 16, and you can offload, cut some VLS modules, put them down into the magazine, and load in new modules without it causing any trouble. I'm talking sets of 8 here. It's an option if it's going to be worthwhile. And the argument there comes, well, if we're managing to keep them under armor, in some way protected inside the ship, then it's a worthwhile system. If we can keep them protected inside the ship. So even if we get damage, and frigate, they've caused damage to our VLS tubes. Well, 2 are damaged beyond repair, we'll cast those off. 4 we'd already emptied. Okay, we'll get those out, put them back in storage, and we'll reload, therefore, 6 from the store. And that could all be an entirely automated system. And the thing is, the systems are there to do that. You just need to have a ship with the space to do it. You really do. And the drive to do it. This was another thing when I started looking at these ships and going, well, it starts to make sense, because to an extent it depends on the armor scheme you're talking about with a battleship, whether or not it actually starts to make sense. The damage control systems, the subdivision, all these things have to be top-notch, and you honestly, once we start talking about an armor scheme, it does start to make sense, because I was thinking about an armor scheme of, well, all or nothing armor. Now, I could, of course, use the Iowa armor scheme, but I'm going to be pointing out where the armor scheme doesn't match with the modern needs. And from personal experience and watching friends go through this, anytime you point out even a mild critique of the Iowa class, and even this scenario, it would be a critique as to why it fitted the Iowa class when they were designed but wouldn't fit modern needs, you are going to be descended on by hordes of people. And I didn't even want to consider doing Bismarck for that reason. In a nice way, it's telling you, no, it's wrong. But if you do talk about the King George V's, no one does that. King George V's have a very good armor scheme. In many ways, they have possibly the best armor scheme of World War II. For their size, definitely. But the thing is, people aren't as defensive over it. Now, the thing about the King George V armor scheme is one of the reasons why they end up with with literally hull plating armor is because it's easy to replace. It's easy to replace. And this started me thinking about, how would I design a battleship? A modern battleship? Well, yes, I'd want some armor around the VLS tubes, etc. But I'd also want the engine spaces and the command and control spaces and all the stuff needed to keep the vessel afloat to be below an armored deck and preferably surrounded in an armored cocoon. I'd also possibly want more armor on the outside. So I want to build in some armor, and I'd want some armor on the outside. Now, the interesting thing is when it comes to the CIC and the command spaces. Now, if we have a space the crew can retreat to command a battle from, and command and control a battle from, if they can all get in there, and let's say it's less than 100 personnel, and there is a possibility you could get this down to 100 personnel with enough automation, you could design that CIC to also be a lifeboat of sorts. Maybe it drops out the bottom of the ship. Maybe it blows its way out if the ship's sufficiently damaged. Goes boom around it and it disappears off. Has its own power supply, etc., and it can get itself home. There are options for that. There are options which work for that. And usually the first argument against them is, you go, well, we can design a missile to penetrate the armor. That's fine. You can. But the thing is, my outer armor has to be strong enough that it's going to keep off the casual bullets, and it's going to definitely detonate any missile coming in. It's going to definitely... With the inner layer of armor, over the critical things, what happens is the explosion gets triggered by coming through the outer armor, goes off in the subdivision around it, hopefully gets limited by that in terms of impact, and gets blown out of the ship. So it doesn't penetrate the inner. And if you have active systems, i.e. surface-to-air missiles, I've already talked about VLS troops, so that shouldn't be a surprise, guns and other systems, lasers maybe even, designed to defend you and designed to try and intercept those missiles actively, and also electronic systems, the armor becomes a final layer of survivability. And suddenly as an opponent, you're thinking, okay, I need to hit this ship with more than one missile. I can't guarantee on killing it with one missile hit. So if I think of my missile, I'm going to fire 10 missiles and one's going to get through, that's not going to be enough. How many do I need to guarantee a kill on this ship? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it a nuclear warhead? Well, if I go nuclear, that's going to cause other problems, so I can't go nuclear, so maybe I go plasma, but that's also nuclear. Because the main theoretical idea around plasma warheads is using a nuclear charge to get them to work, because they're plasma is basically superheated energy. That's always the best way to describe it. Superheated gas, but it acts more like superheated energy. It takes everything. So I'm probably going to need to require at least 3 missiles to get in, which means I need to fire 30 missiles at this ship alone to guarantee a kill. And yes, it's got enough VLS to defend itself. It will do, if we're talking about something which has armor, is 40,000 sort of tons and all these things, we're talking about something which is going to be packing 300, 400 VLS troops. It's not going to be a good day for anyone to try and fight it. It truly isn't. It truly isn't. It is going to be Armageddon, and it's going to have a lot of missiles, a lot of defenses, and it's going to have a lot of uncrewed systems as well, probably. That's something to think about. Now, there's also the fact its guns are going to be part of its defense. And this is where railguns come in. Now, there have been 6-inch, 8-inch guns tested, and there's been various discussions. As I've kind of been hinting, you need a fairly big gun for something to be called a battleship. It's got to be at least a 12-inch gun. It's got to be at least a 12-inch gun. And to give you an idea for the scale of that, this is my handy 10-inch, not 12-inch, but 10-inch wall measuring system, which I use for measuring, for putting down boards and things and making sure I get corners right. And other weird shapes right. Now, we consider 10 inches. And I take my head here. Well, my head's not 10 inches. And yeah, I've got a weirdly shaped head, haven't I? I have. In fact, thanks to what I'm pushing through, and I can lock this, which is always useful. I'm more 8 3/4 inches. So it needs to be a lot bigger than my head for it to be suitable. A lot bigger than my head. It's a very useful tool, this one. To adequately demonstrate the power. So if you're going for a railgun, and that's, to me, part of the criteria of making a battleship actually a viable option, is if Railguns with the systems around them, and there are issues with the metallurgy. There's issues with the copper. There's issues with some of the design of munitions, etc. and systems. There are all sorts of issues around them, and Gauss guns are always an option, but they are slightly less potent. Railguns are the more powerful, longer range, more accurate, longer range systems, but because Gauss guns introduce a measure of, and it's very subtle for the first instance, and you are able to stabilize out of it and work it through a measure of rotation, it seems. But the thing is, if you can get these guns working, well, we've already had ones which we worked, would be 220 miles in excess of a speed of Mach 7, but they're not working well enough, they're not practical enough for us to implement it. If you have some of your systems available, then it makes a battleship start to seem viable. But you need to have bigger ones to do. They've worked on 6-inch, they've worked on 8-inch, all these things. You need at least a 12-inch gun. You need something which is at least a battleship grade, so its status. And let's be honest, that's probably going to give you a 300-400 mile range before you add in things like hypervelocity projectiles at that power, which might boost it out to 500-600 miles. And the thing is, there's an argument for going even bigger. There's an argument for going even bigger. There's an argument for, if we can get them up to 21 inches, 22 inches, then they can fire missiles. We can fire missiles from them. I doubt we'll do that, though. That is something which will definitely not probably happen before we are in space, but we'll leave that to one side. The interesting thing is you need at least 2 twin turrets for it to be a battleship and have the stages of it, and they'd be mounted forward. I can see it now, they'd be mounted forward. And there's a reason why I chose a Nelrod design. I chose, actually, Edris Nelson, I think, to be the picture at the front. Because, to my mind, what you probably end up with is something like this. With the guns mounted forward, including maybe a super firing beam out, and then after that you would have a VLS store, and VLS possibly further aft as well, different sort of VLS stored around the ship. You would have, again, distributed lethality. Throughout your ship you would have the capabilities. And that's important. Because the guns are part of this. They're part very much of the presence mission. They're part of the battleship status. They're also part of the warfighting capability because the sheer firepower they're going to bring. But, yeah, it's going to be missiles as well. A lot of missiles. And for missiles to work, you need a good sensor fit. Same for your guns. The trouble is, even railguns create a lot of shock, which can have an effect on your systems. So, to my mind, it is doubtful you will have an arrangement like this, where you have the bridge and the main radar atop a structure above the bridge, or that far forward. I think it would be canted further back. Again, this is something you can do with the various propulsion systems we can talk about, because you can move those propulsion systems around the ship. You can have various vents which let them out. They don't have the same sort of stack needs as traditional steam and steam plants do, oil boilers, etc., and those things. So you can really muck things around if you want to. You can really move things around, and you can move them as far back from those guns as you want to, as you can. Again, if you're armoring and shielding the VLS anyway, they should be okay inside their canisters. Especially as the guns will not be firing directly over them. They'll be in front of them, firing maybe to the side of them, but not directly over them. Again, something with enough range or enough capability gives you options, and it does allow you to engage a range of targets. You'll need high-powered radars. You'll need probably lasers and other systems as self-defense systems, because they probably become available by the time we're looking at this. They are now already. There's already Dragonfire in the Royal Navy. I don't think it's yet fitted to HMS Dragon. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because the fact that Dragonfire is not fitted to HMS Dragon just seems wrong. It just seems wrong. But, you know, the Royal Navy has forever been fun. The point of the system, though, will be you're providing a ship with the maximum sensor capability you can possibly fit on it. It will have the most powerful sensors you can fit on it. Combine these things together, you will have a vessel which will give you an unparalleled view of the battlescape, an understanding of what's going on. And that's always an advantage to have for a commander. So here's the really interesting thing for a battleship. And it's not starting from nowhere, because it's always been traditional that battleships have had some deployable assets. And at one point, there was even the whole third-class torpedo boat, which was designed specifically to be deployed from battleships. You find some lovely designs of them being dropped off the stern, and other scenarios. You know, they are things which the battleships would take with them. Now, having a deployable assets, therefore, aboard a battleship make perfect sense. And for this, it's worthwhile considering a Type 26. And Type 26 has this wonderful mission module bay, which can be configured in various ways. And Navy Lookout gives this wonderful breakdown, and I highly recommend Navy Lookout website. It's a really cool one to go look at if you want to go and have some information about Navy and about navies and what's going on in the world, especially the Royal Navy. But they do talk about other things as well. They're really cool. Now, as you can see, this can be configured to carry multiple helicopters, multiple UAVs, multiple uncrewed surface vehicles, uncrewed undersea vehicles, all these things. These spaces can be easily and rapidly reconfigured by just having a large space. It can even take containers. So that becomes an advantageous situation, realistically. Because the same things you have on a Type 26, you can expand to be so much greater, take up so much more space on something which is larger. We're talking about an asset which is going to have 4 times the displacement. 4 times the displacement. Okay, yes, it isn't going to have the huge hangar of an aircraft carrier, but it's still going to be able to have a large space put in there. You probably would have a hangar which at the start could take 2 to 3 medium helicopters, i.e. Merlin-sized aircraft, maybe even Chinook-sized aircraft, and multiple drones as a standard fit. Would also be able to carry many boats and many modules in different in a module bay, mission bay, whatever you want to call it. It could even be a double height mission bay that integrates with a ramp system, because whilst you might have towed array sonar, it's unlikely for something this size. It's unlikely it's going to have towed array sonar. It's more likely going to have lots of systems to listen for submarines, but or rely on off-board systems, i.e. its own uncrewed assets for any towed array operations. Why would you want it towing its own array when you could have a procession of 6 or so uncrewed surface vehicles carrying out leapfrogging movements with their towed arrays, reeling them in, moving, etc., so that there's it's got a safe passage to maneuver through of towed array covered water to listen for any submarines, any predators sitting out there waiting to try and ambush it. Add in helicopters wandering around as well and using their dipping sonars, and drones wandering around and doing dipping as well, and suddenly any submarine approaching is going to go, there are easier targets elsewhere. Yes, this is high value, but there are easier targets elsewhere. There are easier targets. And it would all be about building a layered defensive suite. A huge amount of missiles, a huge amount of guns, and a huge amount of deployable assets. So basically you're considering, in many ways, and what I'm talking about is a hybrid between a battleship, in terms of retaining an armor, but also an arsenal ship, a modern surface combatant, and something like the Absalom class of the Danish Navy. And it would be capable. It would have a small crew, relying excessively on automated systems. Some would argue, but probably necessarily on as many automated systems as you can, and would have firepower out of all proportion to its crew, but would be a significant asset. Would be a significant asset. Now, if this were alive, next slide would probably be me talking about what my design would look like. But I'd actually like to hear what your design would look like, and I realise describing it down below in the comments is limiting. There is also a Discord server on this channel that we have for this, that I have and we have for this channel for people to. So could you please post pictures there? There are sections, but I'll probably put one up in the sort of underneath the welcome chat, on sort of the welcome beginning. There'll be thing of picture responses to what my battleship would look like, or what my battleship would what a 21st century battleship would look like. And I'd love to see what your designs be. I know I do these questions at the end of every video, and I realise some people find them apparently rude. Apparently they find them rude, judging by the comments I received recently. But I think they're a really cool thing to do. I think people enjoy them on the whole, and I would really love to see what, with all this information and your own thoughts and your own thinking and own research, you might come and put in there. I already know some of you have a penchant for designing, so I have an idea roughly who might all send me in, but I'm hoping to see people's names who I never expected, names I've never seen before. I'm hoping will turn up there and show me what they're thinking, because I'd like to think about this. I'd like people to think about this, because I do agree, it's highly unlikely to come about. But I do really think there are scenarios where this starts to make sense. Anyway, what do we have coming out next week? Well, this will have come out after Sir Walter Raleigh, so it's going to be James Somerville, Communication as Leadership. That's going to be a fun one in April. And we have the Battle of Zonshio as well. 1499. I love me some random battles. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Take care and have a nice evening. Oh, someone was asking the other day, they were asking me about the various naval academies. And I've got scheduled in here the US Naval Academy, the French Naval Academy, the École Naval, and of course the various British Naval Academies. Now I am planning on doing more, but because those are the ones where there is readily accessible, a lot of information accessible, they're the easiest ones to do videos on, so I scheduled them into the main course, as I think of it. But during the year of leadership, I think in the Key Leaders series, it would not be out of place for me to add in others. And specifically, I'm thinking about the Christmas specials. And if the Japan trip goes ahead as planned, and everything does turn out, and that'll hopefully be starting to be advertised soon, then hopefully I'll manage to visit various facilities in Japan and picked up resources which are not readily available in the UK, so I can talk about their history. And I'm going to try and pick up others as well as I travel around. I would love to be able to arrange the Japan trip so that I could also stop in Singapore on the way back, because I have some friends who teach in their academy there. And I'd love to meet up with them and see if I could do the history of Singapore. And if I can get to do some connections with Italy and a few other places, I would be interested in doing that. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take energy. And honestly, I have energy, but this house keeps taking up the time. I love it dearly, but I'm slowly ticking off all the jobs. He says, knowing that a whole load of pipe insulation has just arrived. that he's now got to put onto the heating because the pipe insulation which was here, the new stuff was put in by the new pipes, and the pipes put in by the engineers when they came in here, upgraded all the stuff to the latest capability, the latest stuff, and it's really good. Latest installation. There are some older pipes though, which of course were not upgraded as part of the process because they weren't being touched. And I thought, that's okay, that's fine. They've got insulation on them, it doesn't matter. Crawling around in the roof the other day, it started to crumble off. Not sure how old that particular foam is, but it needs to be replaced. So, new foam has arrived. I have crawling in roof time scheduled for fitting new foam. And the thing is, it doesn't take a massively long time. It just takes time, though. And that's the thing about these things. I always point out to people, jobs around home are worth doing. They're worth making. They're worth doing. They're cost effective to reduce bills and all these things, and that's a great thing. But time doesn't come from nowhere. Time does not come from nowhere. And it all takes time. It might not take a lot of time, but it takes time. And that's when you really wish you could get a Roomba which does it for you. But sadly, I don't think I'll ever get a Roomba which can do the pipes for me. But if I can get a Roomba which does the hoovering for me and helps out with dealing with the corgi fluff, oh, I'll be so happy. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.